Welcome to the Marriage Puzzle Podcast with Juli and Thomas Hobby. We are marriage coaches who help couples with pain points about money, intimacy, and communication go from being overwhelmed to being secure in their marriage.
If this is your first time listening to us, thanks for checking out our podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. Let's dive into this episode.
We're so excited that you're joining us again on this podcast because over the next probably 5 podcasts, we're going to be talking about a book from Craig and Amy Groeschel called From This Day Forward. So it's been on our website, Marriage Puzzle /books, but we've just now gotten to unpack the content, so I'm excited.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. Make sure you go pick it up from the website. We've been listening to the audio version of the book and reading it. Like, you've been actually reading the physical book along with it.
Yeah.
But it's available in both. Like, from the website, you can get the paper version. But make sure you check it out one way or another because it's a really great book so far.
Yeah, I'm always on the go, so I do both, like audio, and then go back to the paper book and then highlight and remember, like, oh, this was a good point, but what I like about this one too is Craig Groeschel is reading it on the audiobook, and then his wife Amy has also written a section after each chapter, and so then you hear her voice, and even if you're reading it, you just get both that male and female perspective, which we're big fans of because that's how we do marriage coaching together, to get the male and female perspective on relationships. So.
Yeah, that's actually been a really cool piece of it as well, because you do get to hear both of those perspectives. And he's the primary one writing the book, but I love the inclusion of her, that he wanted to have her take on the book. I think it's actually called Amy's Take when it gets to her portion at the end of each chapter. And she does a much shorter section of the chapter, but to just kind of give her little summary and probably anything he may have missed, I would assume. Like, I mean, that's how it would be in our marriage.
Put a bow
like
on it.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So it's been really fun to listen to, and there's a lot of great stuff so far.
Yeah. So chapter 1 is titled Seek God. And so the takeaway there is our biggest takeaway, really. I mean, you might get different takeaways depending on when you read a book, but from our perspective was God should be number 1 and your spouse is your number 2.
Right. Yeah. And the thing that stood out to me in this section was hearing him talk about your spouse being your number 2, because when you're going through life, you can often accidentally put something else in the number 2 spot. You can put your kids in the number 2 spot. Easy thing to do, especially in our household. That's an easy thing to do, because there's always somebody who has a need.
Right.
And then you could also put your career or your job in the number 2 spot. And that oftentimes can just look like staying late at work too often, and taking calls on your off time and things like that. And we can kind of jump into each of those a little bit more as well. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I was gonna admit I haven't always gotten that right. God first, spouse second. I've heard it God, family, then work. But this was the first time I thought about actually breaking out the word family to spouse and kids as their own.
And then kids?
Yeah, as their own line item, so God first, spouse second, kids third, work fourth.
Right.
And then when I was in, like working in full-time ministry, I'd work at a church and be like, oh, well, I'm working for God, so work would often get to the top, and I'd justify it that way. And so, but that can happen in any profession. So just trying to get work, like work is important. You've got to provide for your family and your spouse or yourself. But I think God honors that that priority and that order. And so I think it's easy, like we can fall into the trap of putting work first. And then if you have kids, I think any parent's going to think it is easy to put your kids first, right? Like, you're not going to miss the ball game or the dance recital or, the band concert or whatever they're in, or
Yeah.
just even they help with homework or food, they snack all the time. Like, you're going to put your kids first.
Yeah.
It's easy. Like you said, they have needs. They're always there. And, just being mindful of, like, am I putting my spouse's needs? And that's fine line of, like, you have to take care of your kids, but also them seeing and understanding, wait, mommy and daddy are talking right now.
Right.
Like, that communicates to them, oh, okay, like, dad's above me or mom's above me, like, in this, like, order.
They're unified.
Yeah.
Is another way to look at it. Like, they're unified, and I'm not going to be able to drive a wedge in between to get something that I want, as the kid, from their perspective. And so I agree with all of that, and I just would add, and I think you kind of mentioned it, like, there is a fine line to walk, because, like, what we're not saying is, when it's time to feed the kids dinner, be like, no, you have to wait. We're not making dinner until our needs are met.
Yeah.
You have to, like, do the practical and correct thing. It's still your job to take care of them.
Of course.
And so, but you have to zoom out a little bit and look at it as overall needs. If your spouse's needs are not being met by you, then the whole household is going to be in disarray. Even if you're trying to put the kids' needs, as a priority, if your spouse's needs are met, like, you're no longer a unified front, and then there is division that's going to be created by something else. Kids, work, anything, like, fill in the blank. And if you're not a unified front, that division is going to happen. So you have to make sure that, you're keeping your spouse number two. And part of that is communicating with them and setting up those boundaries. There's going to be some spoken rules and kind of some unspoken rules. And, in our household, one of the unspoken rules is we do our best to, like, beeline it to each other when one of us gets home, and you're the first person that I greet as often as possible. We have a new puppy, and oftentimes he is, like, just jumping all over the one that walks in the door. And so sometimes it's just not possible. But, like, being realistic about it, like, okay, I'm coming in, I'm carrying 3 bags of stuff, I got to put stuff down, then I'm making my way to you. Like, not, being like, hey, I've gotta go back in the office real quick and do this thing, for work. No, I'm gonna greet you first and talk with you and spend a couple minutes with you, before moving on to anything else. Like, the kids are gonna sometimes run up and try and greet you, and that's fine. A little hug is fine, but, like, your still priority is focus is me getting to you, swimming through everything else to get to you. And I think that that's one of our biggest things that is kind of an unspoken rule. Like, we've never really just said, like, this is how it's going to be. But I think that's one of our unspoken rules. And I think some of your spoken rules have to be around, being that unified front with the kids. Like, if there's something that's going on, like, we have to get on the same page to make a decision. Or, hey, when you get home from work, we own businesses, so there's a little bit of a difference. We can't really turn work off all the time. It's not we don't clock out. We're always clocked in, because we're thinking about it. We're on the clock if something goes wrong. Like, in fact, tonight during dinner, I got 2 phone calls from work that I had to take because a staff member needed something. And so, but we try not to let that creep in as often as possible. In fact, as many times as I can, I'll decline it and, wait for a text or something like that. But you have to set those boundaries from work. Hey, from 5 to 6 or 6 to 7, find your time where it's going to be like, hey, I'm not going to do anything for work during this time. I'm going to be fully focused, and knowing that there's a little bit of flexibility in there, that it's like, I'm not trying to just leave the family to handle something that, I need to check and see what's going on. Like, having the grace in the rule, having some exceptions and being okay, but having those spoken rules is really important.
I think the grace comes because of the priority 9 times out of 10 is set correctly.
Right.
So when work or fill in the blank creeps up, and your spouse kind of, okay, I'll wait a minute. They're not being completely replaced where that thing becomes an addiction, an idol, a priority, and their number 2 spot.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Right.
Like, it's like, okay, when those things happen, I'm in those businesses too. I understand.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's where it's like 9 times out of 10, this is the goal. We're not perfect,
right?
But here's what we're going to prioritize in our life, and that's where, Groeschel say that God first, spouse second, because you say this is my number 1 or you're 1 in a million. It's like, well, yeah, but God designed that person for you. But they're still second. So what we're saying now is like the second is a very important role. It's above anything else. So that's a new perspective. Again, how I said to split out the word family. But spouse and then kids and then anything else. But let's unpack the number 1 of God being the priority in your marriage. I think that's something that we've known for a long time, and you might be listening and that, but what does that really mean? What does that look like for us and what we're striving for?
Yeah, in the book, they talked about, the big point that they talked about in making God first in your marriage was praying with your spouse. There were a couple of other things that they talked about praying, but praying with your spouse is the primary thing. We pray together at meals and things like that, but we had never really taken like direct focus on praying together. Personally, it's not an area that I'm like comfortable with. Not that I don't believe in it or anything like that. It's just, it feels awkward to me. And I'm sure there's a million people out there that feel the same way. And that's okay. I've heard, plenty of pastors over and over again say, you don't have to feel awkward. It doesn't matter what you say. Prayer is just talking to God. Like you and I are having this conversation right now. It's not. It's not. We're talking about the God who created the universe. Really? Like, I can't, like, if you're going to go and talk to like the president of the United States or, the king of a country, you're going to have a certain, presence that you're trying to create and talking to them, even just out of like politeness, out of like honor. And so I get that it really is okay that it feels awkward, that it is just an awkward conversation sometimes, that it really is just a conversation with God. But it's something that I've always struggled with because I'm like, yeah, but like I can't talk to him that way, but you can. And so, that's something that I'm trying to get over and trying to, myself just pray more. And, even if it's just little things, like, I catch something that happened, like, I'm like, thank you, God, for that. Like, that was, I'm glad, I appreciate that you did that for us. Or, sorry, I didn't thank you right when it happened. I didn't think about it at the time, but like, here I am now. Like, and so I think those little things are helping me to get to where I'm comfortable with now us starting to pray together more often than we ever have.
Yeah.
We've been trying to set that example at mealtime with the kids and, teaching them to, pray at meals. But I think there's a whole different level that, we can take it to that, we've actually talked about offline that we're going to try to start doing. We do a Bible reading plan in the mornings right when we wake up. And so we're going to try and integrate that into that time frame. Because in reality, like, that's probably one of our times where, although we're still tired because we're just waking up, that's probably our time that we're most often left alone from the kids. Like, sometimes they're not up yet, sometimes they are, but it's okay if they're in the room during that time. It doesn't have to be a private prayer, but when it is, I think it's going to be a little bit better. But when it isn't and some kid does show up in our room, I think it's going to be setting a good example as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for opening up about that. I think that if you got this book and you haven't prayed with your spouse and you read that, you're like, I'm done with this book and not listening to the next 4 episodes of this podcast. Like, what? There's different topics coming up. Hang in there with us, but you sharing that, it's like prayer, our dinner time prayers, we have 2 10-year-olds, or twins, a 5-year-old. Those prayers look very different. Interestingly enough, the 5-year-old prays a lot longer.
She's a girl.
She's a
we
girl
talked about this in a recent episode.
A lot to share.
Girls have a lot more words to say than guys. We talked about this.
But God doesn't see that differently from like the 10-year-old boys saying like, "Thank you for this food. Thank you for our day. Help us sleep well." And they just want to eat.
Yeah.
And where our daughter says, "Thank you for all these things," and almost tells God all about her day, and it's adorable. And I think that's like that childlike faith, that it doesn't have to be. I mean, I think there's even a prayer, like an example in the book, but it doesn't have to be elaborate. And so just the power of praying with your spouse, because we've done that with text, like, "Hey, pray for me this," or "Pray for me that," and of course, like, we pray for each other. So this is going to be like more intentional praying with each other, and aside,
in front of each other,
and aside from the family, like you pray at dinner and I'll pray at dinner. We actually rotate around like the chairs, because everyone has their own place, right? That they sit at the table, so we just know the next one prays at the next meal. And we even have a 2-year-old who like totally understands to hold hands and kind of blink his eyes like he's praying, and says amen. So he'll get there. But yeah, if you've never prayed with your spouse, join that journey with us, or reach out to us. But also, you said Bible reading plan, so that's something kind of new-ish too. Again, used to study or do our own devotions or thing, and I don't want to speak for you, but it's easier to skip a day, I think. Like me, I'd fall off and be like, okay, I gotta get back in, and your own personal accountability. And I've loved that we're not morning people, but you said we have 4 kids, so they all wake up about 6:30, so we've learned to set an alarm for 6. At 6 a.m., guys, we get up, but we're still in bed, and we listen to a Bible reading plan.
Let's be honest here, and it's more like 6:09 after the first snooze that we're.
This is true, but we have a 30-minute, wake up, and so it can turn into a 20-minute, yes. Yeah. But yeah, so we have a really cool plan that's going through the whole Bible. So if you want more information about that, reach out to us as well. But I'm just saying, like, the point is that we're seeking God together now. So we've been married for 18 years and, doing this God thing, but this year, I think, in our marriage is like the first time we're really trying to like put it back to seek God first together. Yeah. And grow
outside of Sunday morning church.
Exactly. Yeah. And grow in our faith. But that's another thing. If you're not regularly going to church, to try that. Like, it's just amazing the power of your marriage. Later in the book, it says, like, it's harder to fight with a spouse that you just prayed with, you know, or went to church with, or let God change your heart. Instead of looking at, if God changed my spouse, fix him, fix her, like, what? Let's just be real and humble and do this together.
Yeah, I think when I was reading the first chapter of this book and it started, talking about praying with your spouse, and that's kind of when I was like, okay, I've heard this enough times. This is not the first time I've heard this. I've just ignored it all the other times. But this is not the first time I've heard this, and so I was like, okay, this is what we need to try next. But I'm of the realization that if I'm comfortable having sex with you and being the most intimate, then like this is no big deal. Right. Like, if that
what are you embarrassed
that
of?
mindset right like that mindset is no like it's a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't you try this? It's not going to make things worse in your marriage. I should say, it shouldn't make things worse in your marriage if you're passive aggressively praying for the other person.
Yeah, no.
Like, please help Julie stop making that noise when she eats her food. Like, like I don't know. I'm just like making something up.
I didn't know what you were saying.
Like, if you're being passive aggressive in your prayers, then you're using it as a weapon, and that's not the goal. The goal is to come together and be a more unified front moving forward through life together. And so if you come together like that, and it's going to open you up to asking each other to pray for things, or just being on the same same page about what you're praying for, and things like that. I think that's going to be key. So if this is an intimate area, but if you can do the other intimate thing, you can do this.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
Anything else?
No, that was well. We have another announcement though, but that was put a bow on the book, like Amy's stories. But
yes, we are not pregnant.
We're not pregnant. Not like that. I guess I was just excited about this announcement.
When you set it up like that, that's what everyone starts saying. That's not happening again. That, as I like to tell people, the family business is now closed. Like, we are not having any more babies.
Not growing that
one. I'm pushing 40. Like, that's not. I can't do another one.
No, I'm happy with our 4.
No, but the announcement is we have started making video podcasts. So if you're listening to this on audio, you can go and now check us out on YouTube. We're making these videos so you can actually sit with us and watch us have this conversation.
See the dark circle under my eyes from waking up at 6 and taking care of 4 kids.
And so, if that's your cup of tea, check us out on YouTube at Marriage Puzzle, and you can start watching these episodes instead of just listening to them. So check us out there. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's going to help things out, help us to grow. And we've already been seeing a little bit of traction on there, which is great. Helping this message get out to some people who have never heard about us before. So make sure you go check us out, subscribe, comment on things, like all the videos. That would be greatly appreciated. And of course, follow us on social media, also at Marriage Puzzle, Facebook and Instagram. Find us on, subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. And we really appreciate having you along, and we'll see you next time.